Well, my friends, you can probably tell by looking at this, we are going to the Lyndon Baines Johnson Presidential Library today. Daze with Jordan the Lion begins now. I'm kind of curious to see what they have in here. One of my goals is to go to all of the presidential libraries at some point in my life if I can, and since we were near Austin, I figured, hey, we should do this one today. Let's check out this statue they have of him right here. He's got his glasses in his hand. Here's the LBJ Memorial Fountain. So this is the limo that President Johnson had commissioned after he left the presidency, and he had the Secret Service make it. Apparently they had to equip it with a television, a radio, a telephone, and other security features. However, oddly enough, it's not bulletproof. If one morning I walk upon top of the water across the Potomac River, the headline that afternoon would read, "President Can't Swim." Oh, look at that presidential seal up there on the wall. Here we have Lyndon Baines Johnson's 3rd grade report card. Shows that he was a very good student. There he is in 1915. And here's a photo of a young Claudia Taylor holding some fish that she had caught. She would later be known as Lady Bird Johnson. Now here's a photo of Lyndon with a bunch of his students when he became principal and teacher at Wellhausen School in Cotulla, Texas. So this is an essay by one of Lyndon's students at Sam Houston High School in Houston, Texas. And in the big writing over top, that's Lyndon's comments to the kid, basically stating that you have a beautiful character. This world needs more girls of your type. Your subjects are always very well chosen and speak for your training in a home environment. Then here's Lady Bird's high school report card stating that she had all straight A's and only missed one day of school that whole year for the 1925-26 school season. And then here's Lady Bird in 1930 and Lyndon in 1928, the debate team. Then here's a photo of Lyndon when he accepts a position as secretary to Congressman Richard Kleberg. So here's part of his run for Congress. It says that he reminded voters of his strong support for Franklin Roosevelt's policies and his own accomplishments as Texas director of the National Youth Administration. He gets things done. Letter from Lady Bird to Lyndon. You can see on the letterhead it says, "Bird Taylor, dearest, whatever are you doing in room number 1?" Here in June of 1934, Lady Bird graduates from here, the University of Texas. I mean, it's literally right across the street, with a degree in journalism after receiving a history degree in 1933. November 17th, Lyndon and Lady Bird Taylor get married in San Antonio, Texas, and take off for their honeymoon in Mexico. Then they had their daughter Linda in 1944, and here's a photo of her in 1945. A poster for Lyndon running for Senate, and a silver star. He was Lieutenant Commander, received a silver star for gallantry in action during an aerial mission in the Pacific in 1942. Here in 1947, Lucy is born. Here's Lyndon, Lady Bird, and their children in 1948. He did successfully win that Senate campaign that year. Here's a letter from Hubert Humphreys to Lyndon Johnson. It says, "It just isn't the same." On July 30th, 1955, Humphreys wrote this note to Lyndon Johnson at Bethesda Naval Hospital where he was recovering from a heart attack. He said, "It just isn't the same around here without you, Lyndon. This is not in any way being unappreciative of wonderful work Earl is doing. He really is doing a good job and is giving all to it, but there is nothing like that Lyndon Johnson touch. And then this letter was sent to Harry Truman from Lyndon Johnson to show his support for Truman's decision to send American troops to Korea in the fight against communism. And here you see Johnson is on the ticket with Kennedy for presidency and vice presidency, and then here's a inaugural guest invitation for the inaugural ceremony. 1961, January 20th is when it was going to be held. Then of course here, November 22nd, 1963, Johnson becomes the 36th president after John F. Kennedy is assassinated. He's sworn in aboard Air Force One. And I have actually vlogged that Air Force One at the U.S. Air Force Museum in Dayton. If you want to see that vlog, go look at my presidential planes vlog. I walk right in there and show exactly where that happened. Then here we have some of his campaign buttons. All the way with LBJ. Ladies for Lyndon. Democrats winning key, Johnson and Humphrey. And then over here we have his inaugural medal. 1965. And then on this plaque it says, commemorating a crisis, President John F. Kennedy presented paperweights to all his advisors to commemorate the 13 harrowing days of the Cuban Missile Crisis in October of 1962. This one is inscribed to LBJ and JFK. And then here we have a newspaper that says, Fire in the Streets. On July 24th, 1967, President Johnson sent federal troops to Detroit to help end rioting there. And here's that race riot that broke out. And here in 1967, Johnson appoints Thurgood Marshall to the U.S. Supreme Court. Becomes the first African-American Supreme Court Justice. Now this is a letter. It says Merriman Smith was a White House correspondent for the U.S. Press International in the 1960s. When his son was killed in Vietnam, President Johnson wrote him a sympathy note, and Smith responded with this letter. And there's a photo of Coretta Scott King at Martin Luther King Jr.'s funeral. And this is great. This is a letter from the Smothers Brothers entitled, Please Accept Our Apology. And it says in this letter, dated October 31st, 1968, comedians Tom and Dick Smothers apologized to President Johnson for their satirical attacks on him on their television show. There they are. Steve Martin and Albert Brooks were writers for the Smothers Brothers. There it is on their letterhead. So these are actually pages of the diary of Lady Bird, and it says she recorded her thoughts about her husband's last State of the Union message before Congress on these pages. And here you can see July 20th, Apollo 11, Neil Armstrong lands on the moon. And then in January 20th, Lyndon Johnson leaves office. There you can see Lyndon Johnson, Lady Bird, shaking hands with Tricia Nixon. Then here they are out front of the library here. 1973, Johnson dies at the LBJ Ranch at the age of 64. He's buried in the family grave at LBJ Ranch near his birthplace. And here we have 2007, Lady Bird dies at 94, is buried next to her husband in the family cemetery. Check this out, animatronics.
When one of our elder statesmen found difficulty in his hearing, and he went to the doctor, and the doctor examined him carefully and said, well, how much are you drinking these days? And he said, well, he drank about a pint a day. And he said, well, if you want to improve your hearing, you're going to have to cut out your drinking. And about 90 days later, the fellow went back to the doctor, and the doctor examined him again, and his hearing hadn't improved a bit. And he said, well, now, have you cut out your drinking? And he said, no. He said, I can't do anything for you if you won't follow my advice, take my prescription. He said, didn't I tell you when you were here that you should cut out your drinking if you wanted to improve your hearing? He said, yes. Well, he said, why didn't you do it? Well, he said, doctor, he said, I got home and I considered it. And I just decided that I like what I drank so much better than what I heard.
So it says shortly after President Johnson became president, he had a dictaphone belt recorder installed in the Oval Office. He recorded more than 643 hours of telephone conversations to have both a record of his administration and a chronicle for posterity. The recordings offer an unparalleled look into a modern presidency. In the captured words and tones of voice, the telephone recordings also reveal the more personal side of Lyndon Johnson. And I believe those became public a few years ago. Now let's go see what's upstairs. So these are Lyndon Johnson's presidential ornaments when he was in the White House. Here's kind of an interesting mural, him with FDR, him with Truman. This is a whole wall with Eisenhower, with Kennedy, and as president. Here was his identification card, identifying him as the chairman of the Senate Preparedness Investigation Subcommittee of the Armed Services Committee. And here's a letter from Harry Truman congratulating Lyndon on becoming the Senate Majority Whip. And here's the president's passport from 1956. And then this was Lady Bird's. So here they have the suit and dress that Lady Bird and President Johnson were wearing when he was sworn in Dallas. And you can see they were wearing this right here in the photo. And here's some notes that President Johnson changed on one of his speeches. So it says the day after John F. Kennedy's funeral, Jacqueline Kennedy wrote this letter to President Johnson to thank him for his kindness and support. On White House letterhead. 5 days after the assassination, Johnson read from these cards as he consoled the nation and the world during the speech before Congress. And it says President Johnson sat at this to sign the Voters' Rights Act of 1965. And then this is one of the cases just showing what the times were like during his presidency. Kind of interesting, you can see the Beatles stuff down there, the boots, and autobiography of Malcolm X. Then of course Playboy, Fashion, Operation, and Killer Boots. And then since he was president during the moon landing, they have a piece of the moon rock in here. And apparently this was the teletype machine that President Johnson used to communicate with the Soviet Union through. And then these pens were used by President Johnson to sign the Food for Freedom Act, the Emergency Assistance to India Act, the Manila Summit, Conference Documents for Peace, and Progress in Asia. And here we have one of his hats. These are all some of his personal items. Most all of them have his insignia on them in some way. Then up on the second porch we have another sculpture statue of him. Well, my friends, I think that's going to do it for us here today at the Lyndon Baines John's Pretzel. Well, my friends, I think that's going to do it for us today from the Lyndon Baines Johnson Presidential Library. Have a great night, but I do have a little bit of a surprise for you in your next vlog from here, a special exhibit they had. You won't want to miss it. Goodbye.